In a small, vibrant village surrounded by endless greenery and ancient temples, life moved at a peaceful pace, steeped in folklore and tradition. The villagers believed the world was brimming with divine stories, hidden in the whispers of the wind and the rustle of the trees. At the heart of this village lived Vishnu, a young man known for his vivid imagination and an unmatched passion for storytelling. His dreams stretched far beyond the boundaries of his humble surroundings. He yearned to create something timeless, something that would capture the beauty and mystery of life itself. Vishnu's grandfather had been a storyteller too, though his tales were spun in words rather than visuals. Before he passed, he gave Vishnu an old camera, a relic from another era. It was scratched, weathered, and seemingly broken. Yet, his grandfather had always insisted it was special, whispering to Vishnu, "This camera doesn't just capture moments, it sees souls." For years, Vishnu kept the camera as a token of sentiment, but it never seemed to work. It sat on his cluttered desk, gathering dust, a silent reminder of his unfulfilled dreams. Life in the village was predictable, and while Vishnu appreciated its simplicity, he couldn't escape the pull of his ambitions. He often spent his evenings walking to the edge of the forest, sketching story ideas in a worn notebook. He was searching for inspiration, a spark that would ignite his creative fire. The villagers warned him about venturing too close to the forest, claiming it was alive with secrets that didn't take kindly to intruders. But to Vishnu, it was a challenge, a place where stories might come alive. One fateful afternoon, while flipping through his notebook, Vishnu overheard two elders talking about the heart of the forest, a mythical place said to hold the essence of forgotten stories. It was described as a sacred realm, where time blurred and the divine whispered their tales to those brave enough to listen. Intrigued, Vishnu rushed home, the words buzzing in his mind like a melody he couldn't shake. As he sat down, lost in thought, the camera on his desk flickered, a faint glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. Vishnu froze, staring at the once dormant device. Slowly, he reached for it, feeling a strange warmth as he held it in his hands. It was as if the camera was alive, responding to his thoughts. A sense of wonder filled him, but so did an unshakable sense of purpose. He realized this was more than coincidence. The stories he sought were waiting for him, and the camera, in its mysterious way, had chosen this moment to awaken. Vishnu's doubts about himself dissolved as curiosity and determination took over. He packed a small bag with essentials, his notebook, and the camera, which now hummed softly in his grasp. Standing at the edge of the forest, he felt both fear and exhilaration. This wasn't just a journey into the unknown, it was a step into a world where stories, dreams, and reality collided. And Vishnu was ready. Vishnu stepped into the forest, where the air felt different, heavier, charged with a kind of energy he couldn't explain. The towering trees loomed above him, their branches entwined like ancient sentinels guarding something sacred. As he walked deeper, the familiar sounds of the village faded, replaced by an eerie silence that amplified every crunch of leaves underfoot. His camera hung around his neck, its soft hum a constant reminder that this was no ordinary journey. The forest was unlike anything Vishnu had imagined. The sunlight barely pierced through the dense canopy, creating a world bathed in muted greens and shadows. As he moved cautiously, he began to notice strange things. The leaves seemed to shimmer faintly, almost as if they were whispering secrets to each other. A small stream caught his eye, its water unnaturally clear. When he looked into it, he saw not his reflection, but fleeting images of people, figures dressed in garments from another time, their faces filled with emotion. He blinked, and the stream returned to normal. The camera buzzed to life, startling him. Without touching it, the lens adjusted, pointing toward a gnarled tree with intricate carvings etched into its bark. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. Vishnu raised the camera instinctively, and as he clicked, a burst of light escaped the lens, illuminating the carvings. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a figure emerge from the tree, a shadowy form that vanished as quickly as it appeared. His heart raced, but he couldn't bring himself to turn back. As he ventured further, the forest seemed to shift around him. Paths that had been clear moments ago twisted into new directions, and landmarks he thought he'd passed disappeared entirely. It was as though the forest itself was alive, testing his resolve. His camera began capturing things he couldn't see with his eyes, strange orbs of light floating in the air, fleeting movements in the shadows. Each image felt like a piece of a puzzle, but the larger picture remained elusive. After hours of wandering, Vishnu stumbled upon a clearing. At its center sat an old man, dressed in simple, weathered clothes. His eyes were sharp and knowing, as if he had been expecting Vishnu all along. "You've come far," the man said, his voice calm but commanding. Vishnu felt an inexplicable pull toward him, as though the man held answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. The old man didn't explain who he was or why he was there. Instead, he spoke in riddles, telling Vishnu that the forest chose who could walk its paths. "You seek stories," he said, his gaze piercing. "But stories are not yours to take. They belong to the world, to those who listen." Vishnu felt a wave of doubt wash over him. Was he here for the right reasons? The man gestured toward a narrow path leading deeper into the forest. "Go, if your heart is true. But remember, the forest gives only to those who give in return." Without waiting for a reply, he vanished, leaving Vishnu alone with his thoughts. Gripping his camera tightly, Vishnu stepped onto the path, determined yet uncertain of what lay ahead. The path led Vishnu into a part of the forest where the air grew colder and the trees seemed older, their twisted roots forming uneven ground beneath his feet. The world around him was unnervingly quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the camera around his neck began to hum louder, its lens pointing on its own toward a clearing up ahead. Vishnu hesitated for a moment, but pushed forward, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. When he stepped into the clearing, the air changed. It felt thicker, almost alive. In the center of the space, the ground shimmered as though covered in liquid light. As Vishnu lifted the camera, the lens seemed to focus on the shimmering ground, and suddenly, the light expanded outward, filling the clearing. What followed was unlike anything Vishnu had ever experienced. The light transformed into vivid images, scenes that unfolded in front of him like living memories. He saw a woman sitting by a river, her face streaked with tears, as she whispered a prayer to the skies. The water around her glowed, carrying her sorrow into the currents. The scene shifted, showing a farmer toiling in barren fields, his hands blistered but his resolve unbroken as rain clouds began to gather overhead. These stories played out one after another, tales of love, betrayal, sacrifice, and resilience. Vishnu realized that these were not just stories, they were fragments of lives, each etched into the forest itself. The weight of what he was witnessing pressed heavily on Vishnu's chest. The camera buzzed incessantly, almost demanding that he capture these moments. But as he raised it to record, the images flickered, and the light dimmed. A voice echoed in his mind, low and firm. "These stories are not yours to take." He froze, lowering the camera as the images returned, brighter than before. The old man appeared again, stepping out of the shadows with a solemn expression. "You were warned," he said, his tone carrying both patience and sternness. "Stories are sacred. They are not for fame or fortune. They are for those who need them, who will carry them with reverence." Vishnu struggled to speak, his throat dry, his thoughts in turmoil. I only wanted to share them, to show the world their beauty," he finally managed. The old man's eyes softened but didn't lose their intensity. "And in doing so, would you let their essence fade? Would you let them become mere images on a screen, stripped of their soul?" The forest around Vishnu began to change. The glowing ground cracked, and the images dissolved into smoke. The air became heavy with an overwhelming silence. Vishnu realized that this was his test, a test of his intentions, of his worthiness as a storyteller. He understood now that stories weren't commodities to be consumed. They were living things, carrying the weight of those who had lived them. Closing his eyes, Vishnu made a choice. He placed the camera on the ground and knelt beside it. "I won't take them," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I'll honor them. I'll let them guide me." The forest stilled, the light returning in a gentle wave that seemed to embrace him. The old man smiled faintly, his form fading into the trees as the clearing grew quiet once more. Vishnu stood, his heart lighter, but his purpose clearer than ever. Vishnu emerged from the forest, the morning sun casting its golden light over the village. Everything felt different, though nothing in the world outside had changed. It was he who had transformed, carrying the weight of something far greater than himself. His camera hung silently around his neck, its once lively hum now gone. Yet, it felt alive in a new way, as if it had fulfilled its purpose by showing him what he needed to see. Back in his small home, Vishnu sat in front of the camera, staring at it as if expecting it to speak. He didn't know whether it still held the stories of the forest, or if they had simply returned to where they belonged. But that no longer mattered. The memories of what he had witnessed were etched into his mind, vivid and eternal. He didn't need to show the world glowing images or mystical visions to make them understand. The stories weren't about spectacle, they were about meaning. Days turned into weeks as Vishnu began creating again, not with the goal of recognition or fame, but with a newfound understanding of his craft. His films became simple yet profound, weaving tales of resilience, love, and sacrifice inspired by the emotions he had felt in the forest. He didn't use the camera to recreate what he had seen. Instead, he let it guide him, as if the spirit of the forest lingered within its lens. The villagers noticed the change in Vishnu. His stories, once imaginative but distant, now carried a raw authenticity that touched their hearts. People began to gather to watch his films, moved not by dazzling visuals, but by the depth of the humanity they portrayed. Slowly, his name began to spread beyond the village, reaching towns and cities where his work was celebrated for its purity and emotional resonance. But Vishnu remained grounded, never forgetting the lesson the forest had taught him. One evening, as the village prepared for a festival, Vishnu took the camera to the temple at the heart of the community. The temple, a place of reverence and history, felt like the right resting place for something so sacred. He placed the camera carefully on a stone pedestal near the altar, where it seemed to glow faintly in the flickering light of the lamps. The villagers gathered around, watching in silence as Vishnu explained its journey. "This camera isn't mine," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It belongs to all of us, to the stories that shaped who we are. It's a reminder that stories are not possessions, they are gifts, and we must honor them." As Vishnu stepped back, the camera flickered one last time, its glow fading into stillness. It was as though it had passed on its essence, leaving only its shell behind. The villagers stood in awe, feeling the weight of his words and the significance of the moment. Vishnu walked out of the temple that night, his heart at peace. He didn't look back, knowing that the stories were exactly where they needed to be, safe, untarnished, and eternal. For the first time in his life, he felt free. The journey had not just made him a better storyteller, it had made him a better person.